We've got a new shape-shifting Yordle, and Zion Spartan weighs in on what we might see at the World Finals. Welcome to Patch Rundown 414. Hey guys, Miss Pudding here. We've got a new champion, Gnar, and some balance changes in the run-up to the World Championships. I'll summarize what's changed, and then we'll have a conversation about Gnar and competitive strategy leading up to Korea. If you want to skip ahead, mouse over and click your topic of interest. Okay, Gnar, this adorable prehistoric Yordle switches uncontrollably between a ranged mini form and a tanky mega form, while occasionally looking scarier than Teemo in the process. I won't go into how his abilities work, watch the champion spotlight for that, but he's a pretty unique solo laner with a lot of awesome teamfight potential. We've also got balance changes to Kassadin, Kog'Maw, Maokai, Morgana, Orianna, and Rengar, along with some quality of life improvements for Zed and Gragas. Check out the full patch notes for details, because today we won't discuss the specifics. We'll instead talk about the state of competitive, because this patch may be the one the World Championships is played on. This week, I'm joined by Morello from Game Design, Zion Spartan from Team Dignitas, and 6'2" from the Champion team.
Hey.
Who's actually 4'8".
Yes.
So I do want to start with Gnar. Shapeshifter, can't directly control his transformations, and he spends quite a bit of time in each form, like 15 seconds or more. What went into the decision-making behind making that uncontrollable?
Yeah, so we wanted to create a champion who was a little bit different than some of our other stance-switching champions, where it's almost like you have access to twice as many abilities as other champions. We wanted a champion who stayed in these forms for a really long time. These forms had really pronounced play styles that were really unique, and managing the transition between those two stances was also going to be something that players would have to master over time.
The thing about it is, like, while it's also unique, I think how you think about it is also pretty different, right? Like when we talk about, Elise or Jace or Nidalee, it's like you're making a lot of tactical combat style decisions. Like right now, I got an on the hunt, I need to be a cougar.
Yeah.
I need to close with them, I need to be a spider. And it's these kind of split second combat decisions. With Gnar, it's a totally different kind of like zoom level, right? You're making strategic decisions about, okay, in 10 seconds or so, I'm gonna be big.
Yeah.
Where do I wanna be? How do I wanna be there? And what do I need to do then? Or, man, my big form's gonna wear off soon, or I'm gonna be small soon, where do I need to be there? And those are kind of more strategic layer as opposed to combat layer decisions, right?
I feel like for competitive play, Gnar's unpredictability on like when he can ult is going to be a make or break for whether he's a good champion. For Nidalee and Jace and Elise, you can kind of choose which form you're in, how you're going to impact the team fight, the game with your form. But on Gnar, you have to work around him. Like there has to be a team around Gnar, and not choosing exactly when you're going to be able to transform can be really detrimental, especially when you're trying to kite in a team fight. You're trying to siege, but you're turning into big Gnar, and then in lane also when you're switching between big Gnar and little Gnar, not exactly being able to control it. And I think that unpredictability can really decide whether or not he's going to be a strong competitive champion, and whether or not his lane is strong enough as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big penchant for a lot of competitive play to really go with like reliable picks, right? Like you want to, like reliability is like a huge feature for a competitive pick.
Yeah.
So, I mean, with this kind of like unreliability, we're hoping that will change up some of the game for how you think about it, like what we were talking about, but I'm not sure if competitively, like, is that a realistic thing for people to build around or not? We're not entirely sure about that. We hope so. We hope we can change how we think about the game. That's the whole it's the whole thing we're trying to do with new champs, but I think what you bring up is a thing that's really hard to predict how it'll be used in actual like high level play.
Right, I mean, like how would you build a team comp around Gnar?
Any champion that's ranged but can also be a tank in top lane has a lot of potential to be really strong. So I think he's going to be fine for laning phase, but in terms of like the team fight and later on, being able to utilize when he's going to turn into that big tank and jump into them and try to initiate and knock them into the wall and use that to your advantage is just really important, because if you can't utilize him being a tank, then you have a team comp where he's the only tank. Then as soon as he turns back to human form, it's like, uh-oh guys, run. We don't have anyone to peel for us or anything like that. So
yeah,
basically, if these teams are really good at using that 15-second window, maybe Gnar is that good of a pick, and the second his ult goes away, the threat of him being a tank is gone, so then teams go in. So I could see both teams have to be good at playing against and with Gnar, and I think that's a really unique dynamic where people are scared of these individual champions that can make or break a team composition.
Okay, so why don't we go ahead and move on to competitive since Worlds are approaching. 4.13, the previous patch, was a big balance patch, and that's about to hit competitive. And then we've got this patch leading up to Worlds. I'm curious what you think are the most dominant strategies right now and how the meta is probably going to shift as a result of those changes.
So what we've been seeing recently is kind of like the Maokai in the top lane, who's like that big tank with just CC and can just be that huge front line. And then typically mid, you've usually got some sort of like control mid like Orianna or something like that, wave clear. And then you're seeing a little bit of Zed crop up and now. But the biggest thing that we've been seeing recently is those hyper carries in the bottom lane. It moved away from the Lucian to more like the Tristana and Kog'Maw. And that's why there's been a lot of huge tanks like the Maokai Alice in the top lane, because you have those hyper carries to protect bottom. And I think these changes that are coming up with the buffs to Zed a little bit and the nerf to Kassadin to finally bring him back in line so he doesn't have to be banned every game are really going to help spice up it's not going to completely change the face of competitive play before Worlds, but it's going to kind of fine-tune things in the right direction. I really like the use of assassins, and we haven't been seeing that much in Season 4, but it's definitely been starting to ramp up more towards where Worlds coming. Different AD carries are starting to be played besides Tristana and Kog'Maw. Kog'Maw's getting hit a little bit, so.
Yeah. It's been a rough year for assassins overall. We've had to go take care of some things that were really like no response, high burst like problems. But what the thing like the buffs to Zed and the kind of like light tap to even a powerful champion like Kassadin is about. These are the kinds of gameplay that assassins can represent and be healthy in League, right? Like Zed's pretty close right now. Like these little buffs we think get him really right in the range of what a good assassin in League can look like. And then how do they make their place in the game? Because when you have guys like Kog and Tristana running around, maybe Zed's just what the doctor orders to take care of that.
See, but we're already seeing some Zed play,
That's
especially
right.
in the past week. And I mean, we're giving him another buff when we haven't seen what the buffs to assassins are going to do in competitive with 4.13.
Right, and I think this is the difference between like what you test and what's philosophically true, right? Zed, these are good changes for Zed, kind of regardless of his power level. They kind of improve his gameplay, make him a little bit more fun to play, honestly, and do just a little bit to his power. The Kassadin nerfs, on the other hand, are a bit of a nerf to Kassadin, but really extend what we call the drop mechanic, how long the mana ramping lasts on Kassadin, right, into a longer window. So now instead of like, well, Kassadin is just weaker and okay, handle it, right? It's when Kassadin's moving around the map and managing this thing, this is now a thing he actually has to manage much more carefully.
Right, so he has to be more mindful of it.
Yeah, and so he can make mistakes, or he can play it really well, right? Those are the kinds of gameplay changes we think are appropriate, kind of regardless of the power level. And then with some of the judgments we've seen, we say, a little up or a little down to try to nudge them into that final spot.
Reading between the lines, you mentioned something about like the good assassin.
Yeah.
And maybe Zed being a good example of an assassin that we don't mind seeing more often.
Or even like.
Kind of sounds like then there might be some bad assassins, some assassins that we wouldn't be so excited to see all of a sudden pop out of nowhere.
I think a lot of this year was us fixing a lot of those problems, and while their balance isn't, I don't think the balance is completely finished on a lot of these champions, like removing kind of the high burst, reliability, no response kind of play that they all had, as opposed to risk reward, or as opposed to really opportunistic and high tension plays. Zed does some of this. We've seen this even in Season 3, right? And I think we've done a lot of that work. There's probably still a couple of guys I would call out. I'm not going to call out any specific champions right here, right now. We'll see what the future holds on that. But
Yeah.
I think a lot of the assassins are well primed now to start putting in a spot where assassins have a role in League. That role is healthy, and we can support that role much better today than I think we could a year ago.
Yeah, I did want to jump in with hyper carries though, because you did mention that
Yeah.
right now we're seeing a lot of like tanks and hyper carries. Kog'Maw has been pretty much like a staple pick, like pick or ban, and we're nerfing him with 4.13. We haven't seen what that's going to do in competitive, and we're nerfing him again with this patch. I mean, is this the same sort of situation where we're just building onto the same change with a follow-up?
A little bit. In Kog'Maw's case, it is a bit of a follow-up. We're pretty sure that our first nerfs were pretty conservative in 4.13. But additionally, what's really important again about like practice versus philosophy on this, Kog'Maw has always been one of the more interesting carries to see in the game. That's the kind of thing you want to see. Like, wow, they brought Kog. What's that mean? Their team's going to be really hyper-focused on this kind of pick, and it means a lot of things about how we're going to play and what we need to do about it. Kog'Maw's not that guy right now, and we think that's kind of a disservice to the character in the game. Kog'Maw's just this kind of like awesome hyper carry that you pick in a majority of situations without a lot of context of what my team is. And a lot of that's his items have allowed him to get around some of his previous weaknesses. Some of the item changes we've done on ADCs have kind of moved the power on that. And seeing less assassins gives less threat to him. All these things together. But what we needed to do is restore weaknesses back to Kog'Maw so we can leverage that huge artillery range and super high late game damage as his strengths and not just do a bunch of other stuff because he happens to. So regardless of what 4.13 necessarily does to Kog'Maw, doing something like making Kog of the slowest movement speeds in the game really aligns with what the character should be good and should be bad at.
Right, so like when we used to see Protect the Vayne comps or something,
Yeah.
we know that she'd have like a weaker laning phase and that there were actual definite weaknesses to her where she had a bit less range than some of the...
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. When I think of like a hyper carry, I think of a champion that has a weaker laning phase, but to compensate for that, she has one of the strongest late games in the game as a champion. And that wasn't the case for Kog'Maw because he would just win lane. He would win all of his lanes, and then he'd also be one of the strongest AD carries late in the game.
Crazy range.
Yeah.
We were joking that Kog'Maw is he has a really clear identity right now, which is really strong early, really strong mid, and really strong late.
It's very clear.
Yeah, it's very clear. It's still a problem, but it's like at the same time, when you can start saying that about a champion, you definitely know there's not a lot of good trade-offs going on there.
Kind of like the same with Maokai right now.
Yeah. Maokai's kind of the same
Speaking
situation.
of Maokai, we're seeing a lot of him recently since the gameplay update. And I mean, he's being picked or banned in almost every match, and every time I see him on screen, his ultimate is just on for the entire fight forever. If the Maokai train continues, how do you see teams like building and strategizing around him?
I definitely feel like the Maokai train's going to continue. He fits what you need in a top lane so much. Somebody who's good with teleport, has CC, is a huge tank, and doesn't take any damage. And he can just sit there in team fights autoing people and healing and just CC everyone down. And he just fits the role perfectly for top lane. And the biggest thing that surprised me when I first saw the 4.14 patch notes was why Maokai got such a slap on the wrist. I definitely thought he was going to get nerfed harder, Morello.
You know, it's true. Even his teacher plays Maokai top.
That's true. I've heard that.
Yeah.
I've heard that, and he has a big wrist to slap.
Yeah, it's true.
I've heard enough of those. I've heard enough of those jokes. Let's just move back to the discussion about Maokai.
Okay, let's do that.
In all honesty, if you look at all the changes in 4.14, we tended to be pretty conservative with how much we would change anything on this patch. It is kind of the last patch before Worlds. 4.13 had a ton of stuff in it that we're really excited about, but we haven't had a chance to see anybody play on that patch competitively yet. Pros are still using 4.12. So we didn't want to kind of overshoot in a lot of ways, and we wanted to go on things that were more as opposed to like fine-tuned balance changes that may not be true as the ecosystem changes from the 4.13 changes into like more philosophical what's right for this character changes.
It does make sense that Worlds is so close that you don't want to completely change the game 3 weeks before like the biggest tournament of the year.
Okay, thanks guys, that was awesome. That's all for today. We'll be skipping the rundown for 4.15 since there won't be any significant changes as we get ready for World Finals. But don't worry, we'll be back again for 4.16. If you have a question you'd like to ask about a future patch, leave it at the link below and we might address it next time. Thanks for watching Patch Rundown 4.14.